All right, thank you so much for coming on, Chris. Good to see you today. What's your thoughts on the whole drone situations here in Denmark?
Yes, so thank you firstly for having me, and thank you, Martin, immensely for helping me with my most recent story. It takes a lot of balls, just to say, look, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to investigate. You don't get that in many instances. And yeah, just so I'm so thankful for providing with a human dimension of that story. And yeah, it's got some really good engagement. So thank you, firstly. I love Denmark. I've got a lot of Danish friends. It's actually got one of the biggest UAP communities in the world. I think on my Patreon, for example, like Danes probably make up the third biggest bulk of my patrons. And they've got lots of UAP podcasts and stuff. So, firstly, you've got a population with a lot of them actually engaged in the topic and are interested in what's going on. It's also a highly intelligent nation as well. So you've got a lot of really, really intelligent people who actually, do want to engage with the topic and are asking the right questions to the politicians, for example, in terms of flight characteristics and whatnot. And Denmark is such a small nation. It's not just like, oh, one state or two states are affected. It's the whole country. It's a small country. It's like, a small close knit community. So I can imagine it seems like you guys are under siege at the moment. Now, in terms of what I'm looking at the patterns. So, I've been looking into these for a long time now in terms of the drones flying over sensitive military facilities. And, this ranges from Langley Air Force Base, I think it was like 2 years ago now, to Plant 42 in California, where they've got the Lockheed Skunk Works and lots of other really, really sensitive activities going on, uh, to Lakenheath, RAF Lakenheath and Mildenhall and Fairford last year in the UK. The drone incidents as well over New Jersey. So you're looking for similar patterns, and I think that the most I would say the scariest aspect of this, we managed to get some slides released via the Daily Mail, for, pro- which we managed to get for some reason, uh, which showed that I think it was like NASA, the US Air Force, and the FBI had just concluded, that the detection systems had failed in terms of the counter drone systems, and jamming failed as well. So they're unable to detect them, and they're unable to jam them. That was also a similar incident as well with the US Navy when they had the drone incidents in 2019 over the West Coast. They were using drone, I think it was like the drone busters, something like that, and they completely failed. And they tested them the next day, and they were working. They were able to bring their own drones down. So whatever it is flying over these places, they all, we don't know enough information at the moment from the Danes, but I suspect they have tried to use their anti-drone equipment. You know, Even private companies, have anti-drone equipment. So they deploy them for Formula One events and stuff like that, and are able to send them back to user. They're able to locate the model of the drone and all sorts of things. So this is technology which is ubiquitous. So the fact that people can't seem to take them down and detect them, with their sophisticated drone equipment, that's quite worrying. And then you got to ask yourself as well, why hasn't anyone tried kinetic action before? So in all the cases I've looked at, kinetic action doesn't seem to have been used. Why is that? I think that's really interesting. And I've also seen over Plant 42 as well in the US that they got a sheriff's helicopter to see if they could follow the drones, and they still lost them. These things are really advanced. They're brazen. They've got their lights switched on. It's kind of like, yeah, we're here. There's nothing you can do about it. They're sending a message. So why is that? Why is that? Because if the Danes did use kinetic action, they brought one of them down. One could imagine that they could say, look, this is Russian or Chinese or whatever, and then it will cause a major international incident. And then you'd be able to perhaps get them to back down. And then when any other drone incident happened, eyes would be on Russia and China. Should it be in the UK or US? So why don't they shoot them down? That is the big, big question. I know that one of the fears is that they've got a payload, and if you brought them down, perhaps the payload would explode or something like that. But I mean, that doesn't explain why you can't take them down, over the water, for example. So something's up. I think there's a lot of conjecture. And I think we don't have the whole picture. I feel like when it comes to this.
How realistic do you think that private entities has been capable of developing drone technologies that are that advanced, even hindering our way to detect them and bringing them down? How realistic do you think that it is to that private entities has that capability?
Absolutely, 100%. Well, when you look at private entities, they're actually developing the most sophisticated technology, whether it be Lockheed Martin, BAE Systems, and a lot of the other private contractors, there are theories out there that there is like a breakaway civilization involving private industry and private finance. They're so powerful. It's kind of like, yeah, we don't care. Like we're even more powerful than governments, multiple borders and stuff like that. And there had been conjecture, but there had been suspicions that they're sending a message or something like that. But I mean, it's really really good. It's good to entertain something like that, but I guess we just don't have any evidence, like even for its existence, really, to a certain extent. Um, and then you know, putting together the fact that they're doing this and finding out why they're doing it. It's a lot to map out. But then I suppose we don't really have any direct evidence it's the Russians doing it either. I know that there's like a Russian shadow fleet off the coast, and also there's a ship as well that's turned its transponders or something off as well. Um, uh, so it could be, but then again, the Danish are basically saying they're not going to board any ships because there's no firm evidence, and you would get you get the feeling that the Danes did have the technology to actually track where these were coming from or were not coming from. A lot of the times, they don't want to announce something or give away information if it could actually provide a bit of information on its own capabilities, what they can and can't track. So there's a little game of that going on as well. Like Russia might be exploring, okay, can you track this? Can you track that? Kind of playing games with them and seeing how much intelligence they can actually find out from another nation.
But this is not the first time that we are having drone situations in the world, and not at least Denmark. We also had it south of Copenhagen in Køge. So what are the characteristics of the drones that stood the most out to you?
Yeah, so what stands out is the fact they're turning their lights on and off. That's behavior that we've seen in other examples of drone incursions, such as those over, I think it was Atlantic City, where we managed to get the logs. We're seeing that kind of behavior. The fact they've got their lights on in the first place, why would you do that? Like, that doesn't make sense. It's kind of like they're almost making a show of it. And I think the fact that they're targeting military infrastructure, that's something that stands out as well. When they were around last night, there was it was Aalborg. Am I pronouncing Aalborg? Something like that.
Close enough, yeah.
That
Aalborg.
that it has an air base which is military and an airport as well, and they share like the same runway and everything. And it's got its special Jaeger forces there as well for the Danes. So I mean, that speaks that that they seem to be interested in military facilities. Although I would say that when we had the instances over America and over the UK, that they were not targeting civilian airports. So the incursions over Copenhagen, I suppose they're new. And I suppose the last one in terms of similarities is that, it's happened more than one night now. It's happened 2 nights, not in a row, but 2 nights. And this was the thing that I was looking out for. And 'cause after what happened in Copenhagen, I'm thinking, okay, if it fits in with the pattern of what happened over the UK and over the US, we're going to be talking multiple nights where you're going to have incursions. So And that's exactly what happened. It's multiple nights. So it's kind of like, you know, if you were like Belarus or someone, you know, someone that's a little bit less advanced and you're going to do this, you'd be like, okay, I'll do it for one night. I'm not going to do it for 2 nights, because if I do it for 2 nights, then they're going to be well prepared for me. They're going to have all their anti drone systems deployed and stuff. They're going to get their allies to help. So kind of like you'd be a bit cautious, but no, it doesn't put them off. It doesn't put them off, you know. And we had opportunities to do that in the UK as well, due to the amount of nights that these things were over the bases. And you know, from my understanding, from what I'm told, is that very sophisticated counter drone technology was used, and they still couldn't bring the drones down. It's pretty disturbing, in all honesty. And in the UK, they held Cobra meetings, which is kind of like the emergency meetings in government, at least two. And it was a national emergency, but I guess in the UK, there was so much stuff going on, our press wasn't fully engaged with it at the time. It was just kind of like swept under the rug, and we only found out afterwards. Although I did know there was an emergency at the time. But you're seeing it play out real time at the moment in Denmark, and you know right now that there definitely is an emergency. Like, unlike the UK, where it's happening in a corner of the UK, or the US, where it's happening in a corner of the US, in Denmark, you can't get away with that. It's affecting the entire country. All you've got to do is, you know, target 3 regions, and you're basically covering almost the entire country. It's there's no getting away from it. This is really high profile.
It really feels kind of intense being here, and as I said to you before we went on, I have been quite happy with the fact that I've been editing podcast all day long, besides my daily work, because I've been pretty occupied with that. Because watching the news and following along, it is kind of worrying and scary. But maybe could you talk a bit more into the characteristics of the drones, because this kind of advanced kind of technology, what kind of advanced technology do you think is at play here? Do we talk anti-gravitics? Do we talk like something that is completely out of the ordinary?
Yeah, sure. So the fact, so I think the key things that you can hone in on here is that the fact that jamming does not seem to work from what we've seen in previous cases. They've tried to track them with helicopters, they lose track of them. They can't detect them. And this isn't just happening like over bases, as I said as well, like in 2019, it happened overseas. They were coming out of the water. They thought it was actually coming from the Bass Strait at the time, which is a Chinese registered ship, or Hong Kong registered. And it wasn't, because they had their eyes on the Bass Strait all the time, so they were coming from the water. Firstly, like, I never rule out the anomalous when it comes to this stuff, you know, it could be, who knows? I'd rather ask more questions and pretend I have the answers, but I would always also go back to, and I mentioned this in an article before, you know, that you've got this green beret who seemed to die in a car explosion outside the Trump Hotel in January this year, and he was basically putting in his I think it was like a manifesto or something like that. It was like he was basically saying that the Chinese had mastered like an anti-gravitic technology, and that they could park something over the White House with unlimited payload, and there was nothing that the US could do. It's checkmate. That's what he said. I can't get out of my mind. We always hear that there's like a big rush to get this out of the hands of Lockheed and get it, you know, the material studied more by a greater range of like scientists and engineers, because the US may lose its advantage over the tech. What if it's already losing its advantage? What if these technologies have been mastered by, you know, the Chinese and the Russians? You know, we've got to listen to Matthew Brown as well, you know, his testimony where he actually saw black triangular craft seemingly having some type of engagement with Russian intelligence ships. One in eastern Russia up the Pacific coast and one over the Atlantic. It seemed that the Russians knew where these were going to appear, and the Americans were aware of it as well, because they had their own assets there. So either the Russians are contacting kind of like non-humans or something like that, or it's the Russians' own, craft or something. I don't know. It's definitely something to look into because that may, if it is something sophisticated, maybe it's a different power source that they're using, or just anything that does give them an advantage. Maybe that's the reason why they can't be jammed, they can't be taken down, and kinetic action isn't being taken because maybe the US and other allies don't want to they don't want to give away the fact that the Russians and Chinese may have some edge over them. So that's one theory. I find that quite interesting, and you can find that in Havana syndrome as well. Why were the intelligence community? Why was the intelligence community in the US? Why were they so? Why were they so adamant of not admitting that this had a Russian connection? I think that's really interesting because
Yeah,
they don't give away the fact that they are vulnerable.
yeah, I think that there's a big kind of a power play going on at the moment, and we also heard from something that David Grush alleged that this is as some kind of an arm race, and if that's the case, we are maybe seeing this sort of power dynamic play out. What do you think that this um, power dynamic, so to speak, entails? Because we are seeing like the Americans are pulling a bit away from Europe and especially Denmark at the moment due to the conflict about Greenland, but also from Europe in its entirety. So there's a sort of power vacuum at the moment. What do you think about this in terms of all the drones being seen all over Denmark and Europe as well?
Yeah, yeah, of course. So what we're seeing at the moment is the US seeming to pull away from Europe as Russian aggression intensifies over Europe at the same time. And you've got different nations, including Poland, basically saying, look, we want authority, we want permission to actually shoot down any Russian aircraft that fly over our airspace or fly close to our airspace. We want to shoot them down, basically. And you've got the Russians really testing European allies at the moment and the Americans as well. And it seems to be escalating a lot, quite frankly. Um, and you've got war preparations happening all over Europe, and it's pretty scary because things could ratchet up very, very quickly. The Russians seem to have a lot of confidence for a country at war in the Ukraine at the moment and losing a lot of troops as well. Why would they be trying to also start a war with the rest of Europe? I mean, for me, that seems bonkers. And Europe is taking it very, very seriously, and there seems to be a lot of fear. Um, I, I think that there is a case potentially that the Russians' power has been understated, perhaps to some extent. Um, I think as well that they're masters at hybrid warfare. You know, Pippa Malmgren, for instance, is saying that the Russians can cause mayhem quite easily. All they've got to do is cut some of the undersea cables, switch off the internet for the entire Europe. They can take out key infrastructure as well. They've probably got sleeper agents and cells across Europe that can cause mayhem. In all honesty, they don't really need to start a open war to cripple us in Europe. So I think there's a lot going on. There's a lot of different angles to look at it at as well. And also don't forget the Chinese dimension as well. Um, uh, I would definitely say don't forget the Chinese dimension because I think, there is, a theory that the Chinese could be providing equipment and drone technology to the Russians as well. Um, and we also know as well that two Singaporeans were arrested in Oslo quite recently for flying drones over. From my understanding, there was one account saying that they were flying it over military installations um, around Oslo. Although there's another account basically saying it was just over the town centre. But look, anyone could kind of get anyone could be recruited to the Chinese intelligence services, you know. Okay, just fly this drone around, we set you up, and, you know, you go and get some intelligence for us, you know. There's also accounts as well that, I think it was Russian fruit pickers in the UK were, um, travelled to the UK in, around the time that the Lakenheath drone incursions occurred in the UK. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on at the moment in Europe in particular. It's scary times and, yeah, there's a lot to be said for it.
Yeah, it really feels like that we are at some point, at some kind of a tipping point at the moment. I don't know in terms of what is it in terms of a uh, disclosure at in something relation to a new understanding of reality, or is it war? And yeah, I'm not quite sure what comes first. But it really feels like that something is happening at the moment. Especially feeling the presence of the tense atmosphere in here in Denmark right now. I think we all feel it right now. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a really, really dangerous situation, you know. You've got in in my own opinion, you've got multiple countries that could easily tip into civil war, within the next 5 years in Europe. You know, we saw what happened to Charlie Kirk as well. And then also you've got outside threats such as Russia and China pulling their weight around. You know, you'd think that in this atmosphere, you know, disclosure would be what we need if there is a non-human intelligence there. We should all work together on this problem, you know, and it can actually bring all sides around the table, like we saw at the recent hearing, you know, when you had Democrats and Republicans are at each other's throat for most of the time, actually talking along the same lines and cooperating, you know, this is the topic that could actually unite. But then, you know, you hear of other accounts, you know, that the phenomena of non-human intelligence is just looking to stir up trouble and it thrives on conflict and it's divide and conquer to keep our humans just fighting amongst each other, basically, instead of advancing as much as we could. So there's so many theories when it comes to this. There's so many ways of looking at it, you know, and it. I try you know I think I've gone through so many different theories, you know, from the Russians and Chinese having non-human technology, to, you know, the others, let's say, non-human intelligence is basically stirring a conflict amongst us, to then, you know, Russia potentially just being involved and having a slight edge over us that we're completely vulnerable to. So there's so many theories out there, and I think it's good to just think outside the box. It's good to put them all on the table, you know, and just ask more questions at the moment because we don't seem to be getting many answers.
Exactly. I completely agree. But Chris, I don't want to take too much of your time. I know you've had a long day, and I had a long day myself as well. It's busy times, and both the both of us have normal jobs, so to speak, on the side of this. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on.
Martin, thank you. Thank you so much. You're like my number one Danish contributor as well now. Thank you so much for your key testimony from the other night. I think it really brought home to a lot of readers what a tense atmosphere it is in Denmark at the moment, you know. Can I just I actually haven't spoken to you in person yet. Can I quickly ask you before we go if you can just describe again to everyone the tense situation that you saw around Copenhagen Airport with the, you know, special forces presence there with the police shouting and on edge. Can you describe that, please? I just want to hear it from you. Sorry.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we went to the airport as when we saw the news, the breaking news. We jumped into a taxi and went to the airport. And the atmosphere in the airport was kind of as it is usually, but there was a lot of diverted flights, of course. So we quickly realized that based on the photographs, that it was like a 5 minute drive from the airport or something like that. So we actually took a taxi to that place, and we were dropped off in the middle of nowhere. I think 100 or 200 meters from a big group of police officers. And just after being dropped off, we were approached by a police car, and they quickly went out of the car and asked us for our IDs and what we were doing there. And we were just honest, saying like, we saw this in the news. May sound weird, but we're very interested in this topic, so of course we want to come out here. And they were like, "There's nothing for you to see out here. You should just leave." And then they drove down the street, and we were like, "They're driving down the street. We are gonna follow." And we did that. And then shortly after that, I think around 10 vehicles came around, both big SUVs and yeah, big cars, both like unmarked and marked vehicles going in like a cortege. I don't know what's called in English, but in a line of vehicles going the same direction as the police car that stopped us, and we followed. Then we ended up at the end of the road, where the police officers were looking for something on top of a hill, and they were accompanied by I think it was military people. They say it was a special force from the police department, but it sort of looked like something that we have here in Denmark called Jægerkorpset or Frømandskorpset, like equivalent to the Navy SEALs or something like that. But they were looking for something on top of the hill. I don't know what. And they quickly said that we should leave the area, and they sealed off the area. And then they actually drove a police car up in front of the area where they sealed it up, and pointed their lights just directly towards us, so we wouldn't be able to take any pictures and so on. So that was a pretty hectic night, and then we realized that they were doing a press briefing at I think 1:30 at night at the police headquarters. So we took a taxi back to the town. It was a pretty expensive evening, I must say, due to all the taxi trips. And then they basically said the same thing at the police headquarters as they did this evening. They don't know what it is. And my impression was at that point that with all due respect to the journalists, that they were not asking the right questions. They were not asking about the flight characteristics, and did the police take any pictures? Do we have any like documentation of what's going on and so on? But they have followed up on that, of course. This evening they were asked about the flight characteristics again at a press briefing where the top authority figures was present, and they were sort of a journalist asked, "Did you see any rotors? Did you see any wings?" And they were sort of looking at each other, who's going to take this question, and they just avoided the question. They didn't answer the question. So we basically still don't know what kind of information the police has in terms of the capabilities and the characteristics of the drones. So yeah, that's the story. It has been a couple of long days, I must say.
What a story. Yeah, well, maybe tonight again. We'll see. We'll see if they're seen again.
We'll see. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much again. I really appreciate everything you've done to help people understand this.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you for all the work that you're doing, and thank you for coming on this evening.
Thank you. Take care, my friend.